Well, CRAS is a framework for understanding or giving insight into how questions work in an assessment. CRAS was developed by researchers here at Cambridge Assessment in the 1990s. It developed out of another framework called the Scale of Cognitive Demands, which was developed by some Australian researchers. And that looked at cognitive demands within science questions. And what it wanted to really do was to look at the match between the tasks, the texts and the assessments that that students were being exposed to. And what CRAS was developed for was to look at assessments in a UK context, which could be more flexible and general.
The nature of questions in the last few years in examinations has changed considerably. In the past, we used to see that most questions used to be open-ended, so long response questions with a lot of space provided to the candidate to respond to that question. But in the last few years, the nature of questions has changed in that they've become more structured. And with more structure means that there is a greater responsibility to ensure that the question is really measuring what it intends to measure, and so that, again, the right demands at the right level.
The CRAS framework breaks demand down into 4 dimensions. And each one of those gives a little bit of insight into the way a question works in its entirety. So the C stands for complexity. And complexity means the number of steps or the complexity of the concepts within the question.
R stands for resources, that is, the type of information which is available in the question item in order to respond to that.
A is for abstractness, which is the level of tangibility or not.
And S stands for strategy, which refers to whether the strategy that the candidate needs to use to answer a question is explicit within the question or has to be devised by the candidate.
The strength of using CRAS is that it allows a flexibility so people can take it, adapt it and use it in their own context. Our problem is that you have to be aware of how the mechanism of the scale works. It works particularly well with individual questions, but not necessarily at a whole paper level, so when you put lots of questions together. Similarly, it works particularly well when one judge or expert looks at a question and is able to assign demands to that question. Again, a little bit more problematic when you have a number of judges who look at the same question. It's very qualitative, and there are issues around how do you bring together different views or differing views on a question, because there's no particular way of us answering definitively what is the demand of that question. The problem with demand and difficulty as terms is that they are naturally used interchangeably because they often can mean the same thing in people's heads. That doesn't help us in terms of our research because it means that we don't really pin down the conceptual difference, which actually underpins the CRAS methodology.
CRAS is a very exciting framework because it allows us to not only to measure the demands in question items, but also to understand if there is a discrepancy between what we intended and what we're observing. And so it helps us to alter, modify, and create genuine questions.